Welcome back to Master 79. This is ielts speaking part 2 and part 3, topic number 60. Describe a skill that you think you can teach other people. We will brainstorm the cue card from scratch, build a full 2-minute long turn, and then answer all 5 part 3 questions. One honest note before we start. When this channel says band 9, that is our own assessment of the answer against the public ielts band descriptors. It is not a certified examiner score. The candidate, Huang, is an invented persona, and the answers were written for this video. Copy the technique. Do not copy the contents because a memorized answer is easy to hear and it will cost you marks. Here is the cue card, exactly as it is printed. Topic 60. Describe a skill that you think you can teach other people. You should say what it is when you learned it, and how you can teach others, and explain how you feel about this skill. You get 1 minute to make notes, then you speak for 1 to 2 minutes. A quick word about the source material, because we reproduce it exactly rather than tidying it up. The cue card and the 5 part 3 questions are reproduced exactly as they appear in the source, including the topic number and the wording of each bullet. One thing worth flagging, the part 3 set is about teaching and teachers in general, not about skills. That is normal. Part 3 deliberately widens the topic outwards from your personal answer, and the last question comes back to skills. A real cue card also usually ends with a full stop and prints the 4 prompts in the same style. The source here does not. Nothing is corrected on screen because you should practice with the wording you are given. Before you write a single note, read what the card is actually asking, phrase by phrase. Most people lose marks here, not in their vocabulary or skill, not a talent, not a hobby. Something learnable, with steps you think you can teach. You need enough command of it to explain it. Pick small over impressive other people, beginners. Your answer should show you know where they get stuck, how you feel about it. The card's real question. 1 line will not do. This is where band 9 answers earn their marks. Now choose your skill and do it fast. You have 60 seconds of preparation and you cannot spend 30 of them deciding. Here are 3 candidates and why the third one wins. Playing the piano. Rejected, takes years, hard to teach in a demo, easy to sound vague. Cooking pho, workable, but the steps are a list, and lists flatten your grammar. Shooting in manual mode, chosen 3 settings, a clear teaching order, and a real feeling attached. Pick the skill with the best story, not the most impressive one. This is the note page. 1 column per bullet, and nothing written in full sentences. Notes are prompts, not a script. If you write sentences, you will read them out, and a read answer sounds flat. 4 columns, 1 per bullet, and a handful of prompts in each. Nothing here is a full sentence. Here is the shape of the 2 minutes. Notice that the third bullet gets the most time. Examiners hear hundreds of answers where the candidate rushes the hardest bullet and then has nothing left to say. 20 seconds on what it is. Define it in plain words, then take the fear out of it. 25 seconds on when you learned it. Past narrative with dates, a place, a person, and a turning point. 40 seconds on how you would teach it. Method, not opinion. Sequence it. First, then, and only then. 35 seconds on how you feel. 2 feelings, not 1. Say why, and give 1 concrete image. Bullet 3 is the longest because it is the only one that proves you can teach. And here is the language worth stealing. Notice that none of it is showing off. It is ordinary English used precisely, which is exactly what the descriptors reward. Getting started. I picked it up about 6 years ago. Something just clicked, walked me through the basics. Explaining method resists the temptation to explain everything at once. The concept lands far more effectively only then talk about how they interact. Feeling. I am quite passionate about it. Their whole face lights up. I would not say I am an expert by any stretch. Here is the full long turn. Hyun is speaking. Follow the text on screen and watch how each section hands over to the next.
I'd like to talk about photography, or more precisely, shooting in manual mode, which basically means taking full control of the camera instead of letting it make the decisions for you. It sounds intimidating now, but once you understand 3 settings, aperture, shutter speed and ISO, it's actually pretty logical. I picked it up about 6 years ago, in my second year at university. I'd bought a second-hand camera with money I'd saved from tutoring. And for the first few months I left it on automatic and wondered why my photos looked so flat. Eventually a friend of my brother's, who shot weddings for a living, sat me down for an afternoon and walked me through the basics. And something just clicked. As for teaching it, the key is to resist the temptation to explain everything at once. What I'd do is start with one setting, aperture, and get the person to shoot the same object 5 or 6 times, changing nothing else. When they see the background melt away in one shot and stay sharp in another, the concept lands far better than any diagram would. Then I'd introduce shutter speed the same way, and only then talk about how the 3 interact. I'd also insist on going outside and shooting, because mistakes made on the street are worth 10 explanations. How do I feel about it? Honestly, I'm quite passionate about it, partly because of what it did for me. I used to walk around with my head down, and learning to photograph properly forced me to look at things the way light falls on a wall at 5 in the afternoon. Teaching it is even more rewarding, because there's a moment when someone takes their first genuinely good photograph and their whole face lights up. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any stretch, but I can give a beginner a solid foundation.
Measured from the audio you just heard, the long turn ran to 308 words in 2 minutes and 2 seconds, which is about 151 words per minute. That is a little over the 2-minute mark as recorded here. In the real test, the examiner will simply stop you at 2 minutes, and stopping mid-sentence costs you nothing. The band descriptors do not set a word count or a speed. Speaking faster does not raise your score. Speaking clearly does. So why does that read as a high-scoring answer? 4 reasons, 1 for each of the 4 marking criteria: fluency and coherence, sequenced with as 4, after that, only then, no repair, no restarts, lexical resource, precise, not decorative, melt away by any stretch, a solid foundation, grammatical range, past perfect, I'd bought, I'd save, conditionals, what I'd do is relative clauses stacked without collapsing, pronunciation, judged live, not from a script, chunking and stress carry more weight than individual sounds, assessed internally against the public band descriptors, not a certified examiner score. Now part 3. The examiner drops the cue card and opens the topic out. The questions get more abstract, the answers get shorter, and the marking shifts towards how well you can develop and defend an opinion. Aim for 30 to 60 seconds each. Question 1. What are the differences between online and face-to-face teaching? The tactic here: compare on two axes, then concede.
The obvious difference is convenience. Online you can learn from anywhere and rewind the explanation as many times as you like, which suits self-motivated learners. But face-to-face teaching gives you something that's very hard to replicate on a screen: immediate feedback and a sense of accountability. A teacher standing in front of you can read the room. They notice a blank look on your face and adjust on the spot. I'd also say that online learning tends to work better for knowledge-based subjects, whereas anything hands-on, like a sport or a musical instrument, is much harder to teach remotely because the teacher needs to physically correct what you're doing.
Question 2. What can be done to improve modern teaching methods? The tactic here: propose, justify, then admit the constraint.
I think the biggest improvement would be shifting away from rote learning towards problem solving. In a lot of classrooms, students are still rewarded for memorizing information they could look up in seconds, which seems increasingly pointless. I'd like to see more project-based work, where learners have to apply what they've been taught to a real situation. Smaller classes would help too, obviously, though that comes down to funding. And I do think technology could be used more intelligently, not just putting a textbook on a screen, but using simulations and instant feedback, so students find out immediately where they've gone wrong rather than a week later.
Question 3. Should teachers be funny when they teach? The tactic here: refuse the yes/no, then draw the line.
Not necessarily funny,
But I'd say a sense of humor helps enormously.
humor lowers the tension in a classroom, and when people are relaxed, they're far more willing to ask questions and admit they haven't understood something. That said, it has to be natural. The teacher who forces jokes into every lesson can come across as if they're performing rather than teaching, and it eats into time that could be spent on the material. So I'd put it this way: humor should be a seasoning rather than the main ingredient. What matters far more is whether the teacher explains things clearly and treats students with respect.
Question 4. What qualities should teachers have? The tactic here: rank, do not list.
Patience would be at the top of my list, because learners progress at wildly different speeds. And a teacher who gets frustrated quickly does real damage to a student's confidence. Beyond that, I'd say the ability to explain the same idea in 3 or 4 different ways. If one explanation doesn't land, you need another route in. Enthusiasm matters as well. It's genuinely contagious, and it's very hard to care about a subject when the person teaching it clearly doesn't. And finally, fairness. Students are extremely sensitive to favoritism, and once they feel a teacher has picked favorites, they switch off completely.
Question 5. Which do you think is more important, practical skills or academic skills? The tactic here: reject the false choice, then choose anyway.
I don't think it's an either or, honestly, but if I had to choose, I'd lean towards practical skills, simply because a lot of the academic knowledge people accumulate is forgotten within a few years, whereas skills like managing money, cooking, or communicating clearly stay with you for life. Having said that, academic study isn't really about the facts. It trains you to think analytically and to weigh up evidence, and that underpins almost everything else. So the ideal, I suppose, is a curriculum that keeps academic rigor but builds practical application into it, teaching statistics through real data, for instance, rather than abstract exercises.
4 things to take away from this topic. Pick the skill with the best story, not the most impressive one. Bullet 3 is where the marks are. Sequence a method first, then, only then. How you feel needs 2 feelings, a reason, and 1 concrete image. In part 3, refuse the false choice. then commit to a side anyway. That is topic 60. If you found this useful, subscribe to bmaster79 for the rest of the speaking series, writing task 1, writing task 2 and topic-based collocations. Practice this cue card out loud before you watch the next one. Reading a model answer is not practice. Thank you for watching.